I swore I'd never be cast out for refusing a monster's hand in marriage. But when you're a chieftain's daughter, your body isn't yours. It's a bargaining chip. They exiled me to the borderlands for choosing survival over submission. I thought the worst was behind me. I thought the silence of the northern woods would finally give me peace. But on the third night in that abandoned cabin, I heard something beneath my bed. Something bleeding. Something that would bring the most dangerous man in the north straight to my door. If you've ever felt thrown away by the people who were supposed to protect you, stay with me. This story is for you. Before we continue, let's talk about political exile in medieval societies. In the 10th century, women like Sybil had virtually no agency. Arranged marriages weren't about love, they were treaties written in flesh. Refusing a political union, especially with a warlord, was seen as treason against your own family. Exile wasn't just banishment, it was a death sentence wrapped in mercy. You were stripped of name, protection, and resources, left to survive in territories where law didn't reach. Now, back to Sybil's story. The cabin smelled like rot and forgotten death. Moss choked the gaps between stone walls, and the air tasted of damp earth and pine. Sybil stood in the doorway of what would now be her home, a hunter shack abandoned so long ago that even the forest had started reclaiming it. Her red hair, once braided with silver thread by her mother's handmaids, now hung in a single practical plait down her back. Her dress, once fine linen, was torn at the hem, stained with 3 days of mud and shame. She had been the favored daughter, the one her father paraded at feasts, the one poets wrote songs about, until the day warlord Matthias arrived with his marriage offer and his reputation for breaking women like horses. "You will accept," her father had commanded, his voice cold as the northern wind, "or you will leave my hall and never speak my name again." She chose exile. Can Sybil truly disappear from a world that sees women as property? The stone walls felt like a tomb, cold, unyielding, final. Sybil dragged her single trunk containing 2 dresses, a cloak, a knife, and a handful of herbs her mother had slipped her in secret across the warped floorboards. The hearth was black with ancient soot. The bed was a heavy oak frame with a moth-eaten mattress that smelled like mouse droppings. But it was hers. No father to sell her, no warlord to break her, no council of men deciding her worth. She built a fire with shaking hands, the first she'd ever built alone. The smoke stung her eyes, but the warmth, gods, the warmth, made her chest tighten with something close to hope. "I can survive this," she whispered to the empty room. "I can disappear." The woods outside answered with silence. But in the north, silence was a luxury the gods rarely granted. Comment below. Have you ever had to start over from nothing? Drop a fire if you know what it feels like to rebuild yourself alone. Sybil slept fully clothed, her knife tucked under the thin pillow. The forest sounds were alien. Owls, wind through pines, the distant howl of something wild. She told herself it was just wolves, just animals, nothing that would come for her. But deep in her bones, beneath the exhaustion and shame, a small voice whispered the truth she'd been avoiding since the moment she crossed into the borderlands. The North remembered everything, and the North never let you hide for long. 3 nights. That's all the peace she would get. The next chapter changes everything. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what she finds under that bed. Trust me, you won't see it coming. The frost moon rose on the 3rd night, and with it came the sound that would destroy any hope of peace. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the wolves in the distant hills. It was something wet, desperate, and directly beneath my bed. Sybil woke to rhythmic scratching, not the frantic scrabbling of a rat, but something slower, deliberate, pained.
Her heart hammered against her ribs as she sat up in the darkness, the dying embers of the fire casting weak orange light across the cabin. The scratching stopped, then started again. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch. The smell hit her next. Iron, sharp and metallic. Blood. Her hand found the knife under her pillow, fingers trembling as she slid off the mattress onto the cold floorboards. The wood was icy against her bare knees as she knelt, every instinct screaming at her to run, to flee, to pretend she'd heard nothing. But she'd spent her entire life pretending. She was done with that. Sybil pressed her cheek to the floor and peered into the darkness beneath the heavy oak bed frame. Two eyes stared back, glowing, amber, feral. Is this the moment that kills her? Gods, Sybil breathed, jerking backward. But the creature didn't lunge, didn't snarl. It let out a soft, guttural whimper that sounded hauntingly, impossibly human. Sybil's breath came in short gasps as she grabbed the candle from the bedside table, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to light it from the embers. The flame caught, and she held it low, extending her arm toward the darkness beneath the bed. The light revealed gray fur, winter ash, matted and soaked. A wolf pup, no larger than a hunting dog, its ribs showing through its coat. But it was the wound that made Sybil's stomach twist. A jagged gash across its flank wept thick, dark blood onto her floorboards. And embedded in the torn flesh, glinting in the candlelight, was the unmistakable shimmer of silver. A silver-laced arrow wound. Sybil's throat went dry. She'd heard the stories. Silver didn't just wound wolves. It poisoned them. It burned from the inside out, turning blood to acid, flesh to rot. This creature was dying. If you've ever had to choose between your safety and doing what's right, you know exactly what Sybil's feeling right now. Drop a heart if you'd help. Easy, Sybil whispered, reaching out slowly. I won't hurt you. The pup's amber eyes tracked her movement, intelligent and aware in a way no animal should be. When her fingers brushed its blood-soaked fur, it didn't snap. It leaned into her touch, trembling. That's when Sybil knew. This wasn't a wolf. This was a shifter. A child trapped in beast form, too young or too injured to shift back. And someone had tried to kill it with silver. Sybil's mind raced. Harboring a shifter was a death sentence in the Borderlands. The old laws were clear. Werewolves belonged to their packs, and interfering with pack business meant execution. No trial, no mercy. She could walk away. She could leave right now and disappear deeper into the woods and pretend she'd never seen those amber eyes. But as the pup whimpered again, a sound so broken, so small, Sybil's hands were already moving. All right, little wolf, let's get you out of there. Will this choice doom her before dawn? Sybil dragged the pup out as gently as she could, but even her careful hands made it yelp. The sound cut through her like a blade. She laid it on the blanket she'd spread by the fire, and in the brighter light, the wound looked worse. The silver had burned the flesh black at the edges. Infection had already started. She could smell it beneath the blood. Sour and wrong. Who did this to you? Sybil whispered, brushing matted fur away from the pup's face. It looked at her with eyes far too old for its small body. Eyes that held pain, yes, but also something else. Hope. Sybil swallowed hard, her throat tight. She'd been cast out for refusing to be someone's possession. How could she turn away a child who'd been hunted like an animal? You're safe now, she said softly, even though she knew it was a lie. Because the moment she chose to save this creature, safety became something neither of them would ever have again. The next chapter reveals who this pup really is, and trust me, it changes everything. Comment WOLF if you think Sybil made the right choice.
I spent the entire night trying to save a dying wolf pup. By dawn, I realized I hadn't saved a wolf at all. I'd saved something far more dangerous, and the name he whispered would bring a storm I couldn't survive. Sybil worked through the night like a woman possessed. Her hands moved with precision born of desperation, boiling water over the fire, crushing herbs her mother had taught her to use, tearing strips from her only spared dress to make bandages. The silver arrowhead had to come out first. She held the pup's trembling body down with one arm, while her other hand worked the iron tweezers closer to the embedded metal. The moment the tweezers touched silver, the pup convulsed, a howl tearing from its throat that sounded too human, too aware. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," Sybil chanted, tears streaming down her face as she finally gripped the arrowhead and pulled. It came out with a wet sound that made her stomach heave. The silver gleamed in the firelight, covered in blackened blood that smoked when it hit the floor. The pup went limp. "No, no, stay with me." Sybil pressed the poultice of yarrow and comfrey into the wound, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the bandage. "You don't get to die, not after all that." "Will the poison claim the pup before dawn?" As the hours crawled toward morning, Sybil realized something that made her blood run cold. The pup was watching her. Not the way an animal watches, with instinct and fear, but the way a child watches a parent, with understanding, with trust, with a desperate, aching hope. Its amber eyes tracked her every movement as she refreshed the water, added wood to the fire, checked the bandage for bleeding. When she sat down beside it, exhausted beyond words, the pup shifted closer and rested its head on her lap. The gesture was so deliberate, so human, that Sybil's hand froze halfway to its fur. "You understand me, don't you?" she whispered. The pup's eyes closed once, slowly, like a nod. Sybil's breath caught. "You're trapped. You can't shift back." Another slow blink. "Gods," Sybil breathed. "How old are you?" The pup made no response this time. Perhaps it couldn't answer. Perhaps the question was too complex for a child locked in an animal's body. Sybil stroked its head gently, feeling the fever burning beneath the fur. "It's all right. You're safe now. I promise." The lie tasted like ash on her tongue. If you've ever made a promise you weren't sure you could keep, drop a broken heart. Sometimes love means lying to make someone feel safe. Dawn broke with pale gray light filtering through the gaps in the stone walls. Sybil had dozed off sitting up, her head resting against the rough wood of a chair, when a sound jerked her awake. Cracking, wet, organic. She opened her eyes to see the impossible. The pup's body was shifting, fur receding into skin, bones reshaping with sounds that made her want to vomit. Within moments, the gray wolf was gone. In its place, curled on her floor, was a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, pale skin, shock of dark hair, the same amber eyes, now too large in a gaunt face. The bandage she'd wrapped around the wolf was now tied awkwardly around a child's thin torso, already soaked through with fresh blood. He was shivering violently, his lips blue with cold or fever or both. Sybil moved without thinking. She grabbed her cloak and wrapped it around him, gathering him into her arms. He weighed almost nothing, all bird bones and fragile hope. "Shh, little wolf," she whispered, carrying him to the bed. "I've got you." His eyes fluttered open, fever-bright and unfocused. His lips moved, forming words so quiet she had to lean in close to hear. "Bram, Papa, Bram." The name hit Sybil like a physical blow. Sybil's hands went numb. Bram. Everyone in the North knew that name, the Iron Claw Alpha King, the warrior who'd united 3 fractured packs under his rule through blood and steel, the man whose territory stretched from the frozen coast to the mountain passes, the man whose wrath was legendary. And this boy, this dying, fevered child, was calling him Papa. "No," Sybil breathed, her voice breaking. "No, no, no!" This wasn't just any shifter child. This was the heir, the prince, the future of the Iron Claw pack.
and someone had tried to assassinate him with silver, which meant this wasn't an accident. This was treason. This was a coup. And she, a disgraced exile with no name, no protection, no power, was now caught in the center of a war between wolves. Sybil looked down at the boy sleeping in her bed, so small and vulnerable, and felt the walls of her tiny sanctuary closing in. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty cabin. Outside, the forest had gone silent. Even the birds had stopped singing. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm. How long before the Alpha King comes for his son?
3 days. That's how long I had before the horns sounded. 3 days of pretending I could hide the Alpha King's son. 3 days before Brahm himself came to my door, and I learned that some men don't ask for what's theirs. They take. The horns shattered the morning like breaking glass. Sybil's head snapped up from where she'd been spooning broth into Silas's mouth. The boy's fever had broken the night before, but he was still weak, still unable to shift back to wolf form. The sound came again, deep, resonant, carrying through the forest like a war cry. 3 long blasts, a signal. "No," Sybil whispered. "Not yet. Please, not yet." But the forest didn't care about her prayers. The ground began to shake, not an earthquake, but something worse, the thunder of hooves, many hooves, heavy with armor and riders who knew how to move as one. Sybil ran to the window, her heart in her throat. Through the mist curling between the pines, she saw them. 20 riders, maybe more, massive horses bred for war, their breath steaming in the cold air. The riders wore black leather and iron, weapons gleaming at their sides. They moved in formation, practiced and lethal. And at their head, Sybil's breath stopped. He was enormous. Even mounted, his presence dominated the clearing. Black furs draped over shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a kingdom. His face was all hard angles and sharp focus, handsome in the way a blade is handsome, beautiful and deadly. But it was his eyes that pinned her in place. Golden, predatory, absolute. The Alpha King had come. Can Sybil survive the next 5 minutes? Sybil forced herself to step outside, closing the cabin door behind her. Her hands trembled, but she braided them intaglio in front of her, chin lifted despite her terror. The Alpha didn't dismount. He looked down at her from his warhorse, and Sybil felt the weight of his judgment like a physical thing. "You have something of mine, exile." His voice rolled like distant thunder, deep, controlled, carrying effortless command. "Give me the boy, and I might leave your cabin standing." Every word was a threat wrapped in civility. Sybil's throat was dry as bone, but she held his gaze. "He is a child, and he was dying. If you take him now, the silver poison in his blood will finish what your enemies started." Something flickered in those golden eyes. Surprise, perhaps. No one spoke to the Alpha King this way. "You dare dictate terms to me?" Brahm's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I could burn this entire forest to ash. I could scatter your bones for the ravens. Who are you to tell me what will happen to my son?" "I'm the woman who saved his life," Sybil shot back, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm the one who pulled silver from his flesh while he screamed. I'm the one who kept him breathing through 3 nights of fever. And I'm telling you, as someone who actually knows what state he's in, that moving him now will kill him." The silence that followed was suffocating. The riders shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. But Brahm raised one hand, and they froze. "You healed him." It wasn't a question. "I tried." "With what skill?" "Herbs, clean water, prayer," Sybil's voice wavered. "Whatever I had." Brahm finally dismounted. The movement was fluid, controlled, a warrior's grace wrapped in barely contained violence.
He moved toward the cabin, and Sybil's body screamed at her to run, but she stood her ground, even as he towered over her, even as his presence filled the space between them like a living thing. "Move," he commanded. "No." His eyes flashed gold. "I will not ask twice." "Then don't ask," Sybil's voice shook, but held. "Break down the door, drag him out, but when he dies on the road because you were too proud to listen, you'll know it was your choice." For a heartbeat, she thought he would strike her. His hand twitched toward the sword at his hip. Then he moved past her, shouldering the door open. Sybil followed, her heart hammering, watching as the most powerful man in the north entered her tiny, broken cabin. He stopped 3 steps inside. On the bed, wrapped in Sybil's cloak, was Silas. His small face was still too pale, his breathing shallow, but his amber eyes were open, tracking his father's movement. "Papa," Silas whispered, his voice thin as paper. And just like that, the Alpha King's armor shattered. Brom crossed the cabin in 2 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bed. His massive hands, hands that ended lives, commanded armies, hovered over his son as if afraid to touch him. "Silas!" The name came out broken. "My son!" "It hurts, Papa," Silas breathed. "The silver, it still hurts." "I know. I know." Brom's voice cracked. His hand finally settled on Silas's head, impossibly gentle. "Who did this? Tell me who." But Silas's eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling him back under. Brom stayed there frozen, kneeling beside a bed in a cabin he could destroy with a word, and Sybil saw what the world never got to see. The Alpha King was just a father, terrified of losing his child. When Brom finally looked up at her, his golden eyes were no longer cold. They were desperate. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Until he's strong enough to move? A week, maybe 2. And the silver? I got it all out, but the poison—" I hesitated. "It's still in his blood. He needs rest, warmth, care." Brom stood slowly, his gaze moving from his son to Sybil and back again. He could see him calculating, strategizing, weighing options. Finally, he spoke. "I'm staying." "What?" "I'm staying, here, until he's well enough to travel." Brom's voice returned to command, but something in it had softened. "You will continue his care. My guard will secure the perimeter, and you," his eyes locked on hers, "will be compensated for what you've done." "I don't want compensation." "Then what do you want, exile?" Sybil looked at Silas, then back at the king who could end her life with a word. "Just let him heal," she said quietly. "That's all." Brom studied her for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his face. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said finally. "Maybe both." For the first time, the Alpha King's mouth almost curved into something that might have been a smile. "Maybe both," he agreed.
I thought saving the Alpha King's son would earn me gratitude and distance. Instead, Brom stayed. And in the quiet spaces between his son's fevered sleep and my desperate healing, something far more dangerous than any wolf began to grow between us. The forest around Sybil's cabin transformed within days. Where once there had been only silence and moss, now there were tents hidden beneath pine branches, sentries posted in shadows, and the low murmur of warriors speaking in careful whispers. Brom had turned the clearing into a fortress without walls. His elite guard, 12 of his most trusted wolves, moved like ghosts through the trees. They never came close to the cabin unless summoned, never made eye contact with Sybil, never questioned why their king had chosen to remain in this forgotten corner of the borderlands. Inside the cabin, Silas slept on Sybil's bed, his small chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The silver had been removed, the wound cleaned and packed with herbs, but the poison lingered in his blood like a curse.
Sybil sat beside him, changing the bandages for the third time that day, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. "You haven't slept." Brahm's voice came from the doorway, deep, quiet, carrying the weight of command even in concern. Sybil didn't look up. "Neither have you." How long can they both keep pretending this is temporary? Brahm watched her work with an intensity that should have felt invasive. Instead, Sybil found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the way he stood so still, the way his golden eyes tracked every movement of her hands, the way he seemed to be cataloging her competence like a general assessing a warrior. "He trusts you," Brahm said after a long silence. "Silas doesn't trust easily." "He's a child who was shot with silver and left to die," Sybil replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "Right now, I'm the safest thing in his world." "You're wrong." Sybil's hands stilled. She looked up. Brahm stepped into the cabin, this massive frame making the small space feel even smaller. He knelt beside the bed, this king, this alpha, this man who commanded armies, and placed his hand gently on his son's forehead. "I am the king of the Iron Claw Pack," Brahm said softly, his eyes on Silas. "I have won wars, executed traitors, and bent 3 territories to my will, but I could not do what you did. I could not have saved him." Sybil's throat tightened. "You would have found a way." "No." Brahm's gaze lifted to hers, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she saw past the armor. The weight of that confession settled between them like a living thing. They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks. Sybil would tend to Silas during the day, feeding him bone broth, changing his bandages, singing old lullabies her mother had taught her. Brahm would take the night watch, sitting by the fire with his sword across his knees, listening to the forest for threats that never came. But some nights, Sybil couldn't sleep. She would emerge from the small side room where she'd moved her bedding, wrapped in her cloak, and find Brahm by the fire. He never sent her away, never told her to rest. Instead, he would pour her tea from the pot that was always warm, and they would sit in comfortable silence. "Why did you refuse the warlord?" Brahm asked one night, his voice barely above a whisper. Sybil stared into the flames. "Because I'd rather die free than live as property, even if it meant losing everything, especially then." She looked at him, firelight dancing in her eyes. "Some chains are worse than death, Your Majesty." Brahm's jaw tightened. "Brahm, when it's just us, call me Brahm." Something shifted in that moment, something neither of them was ready to name. The mate pull, ancient and undeniable, hummed between them like a song only their souls could hear. Sybil saw the cracks in Brahm's armor grow wider each day, the way he would check on Silas between meetings with his scouts, his hand lingering on his boy's hair, the way his voice would soften when he read to his son from the worn book of old legends he carried, the way he looked at Sybil when he thought she wasn't watching, not with hunger, but with something far more dangerous, reverence. One morning, Silas woke fully lucid for the first time. His amber eyes found his father, then Sybil. "Papa, is the kind lady going to stay?" Brahm's expression shattered and reformed in the space of a heartbeat. He looked at Sybil, and she saw the question in his eyes, the same question she'd been asking herself every night. Can this last? Can something born in blood and desperation survive in the light? "Rest, little wolf," Sybil said gently, smoothing Silas's hair. "We're not going anywhere yet." Yet. The word hung in the air like prophecy.
I thought the danger had passed when Brahm decided to stay. I thought the enemy was defeated. But the real threat wasn't outside the cabin. It was standing right beside the Alpha King, wearing the face of a friend. Caleb arrived 2 weeks into the uneasy truce, bringing supplies and news from the Ironclaw stronghold. He was everything Brahm wasn't, charming where Brahm was commanding, easy smiles where Brahm gave measured words, handsome in a softer way, with warm brown eyes and a laugh that came quick. "My king," Caleb clasped Bram's forearm in the traditional wolf greeting.
The council grows restless with your absence. Let them wait. My son takes priority. Caleb's eyes found Sybil, and his smile widened. So this is the miracle worker, the exile who saved our prince. Sybil felt exposed under his gaze, like he was cataloging her weaknesses. I did what anyone would do. No. Caleb's voice was smooth as honey. Most would have let him die. A shifter pup bleeding in the woods? That's nature's work. But you interfered. Quite brave. Or quite foolish. The words echoed Bram's from weeks ago, but in Caleb's mouth, they felt like a threat. Why does Caleb's praise feel like poison? Over the next 3 days, Sybil noticed things. Small things. Wrong things. The way Caleb's men didn't quite meet Bram's eyes. The whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. The tension that crackled through the camp like lightning before a storm. One night, she woke to voices outside her window. Low, urgent. Too long. The king is distracted. The boy is weak. Now is the time. She's seen too much. Both of them. Sybil's blood went cold. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing, straining to hear more. But the voices faded into the darkness, and sleep wouldn't come again that night. If you've ever had that gut feeling that something was very wrong, you know what Sybil's experiencing. Drop an eye if you're nervous right now. The next morning, Sybil went to gather firewood, a task she'd been doing daily since Bram's arrival. But something pulled her deeper into the forest than usual. A voice carried on the wind. Caleb's voice. Sybil moved silently, years of forest living teaching her to walk without sound. She crept closer to the source, hiding behind a massive oak. What she saw made her heart stop. Caleb stood in a small clearing, speaking with a man Sybil recognized even from this distance. Warlord Matthias, the monster she'd fled, the man whose proposal had cost her everything. The king is weak, blinded by sentiment for a dying pup and a human woman. The council will support us if we act now. And the girl, Matthias asked, she's mine. That was our arrangement. Take her. She's worth nothing beyond being a trophy for your bed. Sybil's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. When? Matthias asked. Tonight, during the watch change. I'll handle the Alpha, you handle the perimeter guards. Make it look like a raid from the Eastern Pack. And the boy. Caleb's voice went flat. Both die. Clean succession, no heirs to complicate things. Sybil didn't wait to hear more. She turned and ran. Branches tore at her dress, her lungs burned, her feet caught on roots, but she didn't slow, couldn't slow. She had to warn Bram, had to get to Silas. But the forest seemed endless, and the cabin felt miles away when it was only minutes. Behind her, she heard shouts. They'd seen her, they knew. Move, 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 Sybil chanted under her breath, her legs screaming. The cabin came into view through the trees, and Sybil burst into the clearing, just as the first howl split the air. Not a wolf's howl, a war cry. The glade around her cabin erupted into chaos. Warriors poured from the forest like floodwater. Steel rang against steel. Blood splattered the moss. And through the smoke and violence, Sybil saw Bram at the cabin door, Silas behind him, already surrounded. "Bram!" Sybil screamed, but her voice was lost in the sound of war. They say you don't know what you're capable of until someone threatens the people you love. I learned the truth of that when I watched a traitor raise a silver dagger to the Alpha King's throat and realized I'd rather die fighting than live as a coward. The clearing had become a slaughterhouse. Bram fought like the predator he was, all savage grace and brutal efficiency. His claws tore through leather, his jaws found throats. But even as bodies fell around him, Sybil could see the truth. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and something was wrong. Bram's movements were slower than they should be, his strikes less precise. He staggered after a hit that should have barely fazed him. Then Sybil smelled it. Sweet, cloying, wrong. Wolfsbane. A purple mist hung in the air, barely visible, but deadly. It was seeping from clay pots shattered around the perimeter, an ambush weapon designed to cripple shifters. No, Sybil breathed, watching as Brom fought to maintain his form, his body flickering between man and wolf. The poison was working. Caleb emerged from the chaos like a demon from smoke. He was already in wolf form, massive, black-furred, eyes blazing with ambition. He circled Brom, who'd been driven back against the stone wall of the cabin. Then Caleb shifted back to human, a silver dagger gleaming in his hand. You grew soft, old friend, weak for a human girl and a dying pup. A king must be a monster. You've forgotten that. Brom snarled, trying to shift fully, but the wolfsbane made his body rebel. He was stuck, half-transformed, vulnerable. It didn't have to be like this, Caleb continued, advancing slowly. But you chose sentiment over strength. You chose her. He gestured dismissively toward where Sybil stood frozen at the clearing's edge. Over your kingdom. She saved my son. Brom's voice was guttural, strained. Your son is weakness personified, and she, Caleb smiled, cruel and cold, she's just a consolation prize for Matthias once I'm done here. Caleb raised the silver dagger, positioning it over Brom's heart, and Sybil moved. She didn't think, didn't plan, didn't calculate odds or consequences. She simply saw a father about to die in front of his son, and her body made the choice her mind couldn't. Her hand closed around the iron poker she'd left by the outdoor fire that morning, left there to stir coals, but now glowing red-hot for hours in the flames. Sybil ran. Her feet pounded the blood-soaked earth, her lungs burned, her whole world narrowed to one truth. She would not let this happen. Caleb's blade began its downward arc, and Sybil drove the red-hot iron poker into his shoulder. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Caleb's howl of rage and pain shattered windows. The silver dagger fell from his hand, clattering against stone. You bitch! Caleb spun, his hand coming up to backhand her, but he never completed the motion. Brom's roar split the world in half. The sound was primal, ancient, carrying power that made every wolf in the clearing drop to their knees. Even Caleb froze, his eyes going wide with recognition and fear. Because Brom wasn't shifting into his normal wolf form. He was becoming something else, something older. His body convulsed, bones cracking and reforming, his already massive frame expanded, muscles rippling and growing. Fur erupted across his skin, not gray, but black as midnight. His eyes blazed like molten gold. Within seconds, a dire wolf stood where the man had been. 13 feet of ancient apex predator, fangs as long as daggers, claws that could rend stone. The legends said only the most powerful alphas could achieve the dire form, and only when pushed beyond all limits. Brom had broken through the wolfsbane through sheer force of will and rage. Caleb tried to run. He didn't make it 3 steps. Brom's jaws closed around the traitor's throat in one fluid motion. There was no ceremony, no final words, just the wet sound of tearing flesh, and then silence. Caleb's body hit the ground, lifeless eyes staring at nothing. The remaining traitors fled into the forest. Brom's loyal guard cut down those who were too slow. Within minutes, the battle was over. Brom shifted back to human form slowly, his massive frame shrinking, his breathing ragged. He stood in the center of the carnage, covered in blood, some his, most not. Sybil dropped the iron poker, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't make them stop. Silas burst from the cabin, running to his father. "Papa, Papa, you're hurt." "I'm fine." Brom's voice was hoarse. He caught his son, holding him tight. "I'm fine, little wolf." But his eyes found Sybil's across the clearing, and in that moment she saw something that terrified her more than the battle had. She saw a man realizing he owed his life to someone, realizing that debt changed everything, realizing the mate pole humming between them wasn't just attraction anymore, it was inevitability. "You saved me," Brom said quietly, his words carrying despite the distance. Sybil's throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded. "Because," Sybil finally whispered, "some things are worth fighting for." Brom's expression shifted, armor cracking, walls crumbling, and for one perfect moment she thought he would say it, would acknowledge what they both felt. Instead, his face went cold.
I saved his life. I saved his son. I stood in the fire and didn't flinch, and in return, Brom gave me the cruelest gift a king can offer, my life, and nothing else. The smoke cleared slowly, revealing the carnage. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing like broken dolls. The smell of blood and wolfsbane hung thick in the air, mixing with the acrid stench of fear. Sybil stood frozen, the iron poker still warm in her hand, watching as Brom's loyal guards secured the perimeter. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking bodies, dragging the wounded aside, whispering reports to their king. Brom held Silas against his chest, his massive hand cradling the back of his son's head. The boy was crying softly, his small body shaking with aftershocks of terror. "It's over, little wolf," Brom murmured. "You're safe now." His eyes found Sybil's across the blood-stained clearing. For a heartbeat, she saw everything she'd hoped for in that golden gaze. Recognition, gratitude, the acknowledgement of the bond that had been growing between them like a secret garden. Then his expression shuddered, and Sybil's world began to crumble. Brom set Silas down gently, smoothing his hair before standing to his full, imposing height. He walked toward Sybil, each step measured and deliberate. She waited, her heart hammering with something she refused to name as hope. He stopped 3 paces away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to maintain the distance of a king addressing a subject. "You saved my heir," Brom said, his voice devoid of the warmth they'd shared by firelight. Cold, formal, final. "For that service, I grant you your life and safe passage from my territory." The words hit Sybil like physical blows. "Brom," she started, "you will address me as your majesty," his tone sharp enough to draw blood. Sybil flinched as if he'd struck her. "Your majesty," she forced out, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand." "You are a commoner, an exile with no name, no family, no standing." Each word was carefully chosen, deliberately cruel. "You have seen the king at his weakest. You have witnessed the heir in his beast form before the ritual recognition. You have been present for matters of pack treason. I would never—" "It doesn't matter what you would or wouldn't do." Brom's jaw was tight, his eyes looking past her rather than at her. "My council will never accept a human mate. They will see you as a threat to the bloodline. If I bring you back to Stone Hall, they will kill you to protect the succession. And if I stay here—" His voice dropped, something raw bleeding through. "Then I lose my kingdom." Understanding crashed over Sybil like ice water. "So this is goodbye." "This is survival, for both of us." Brom turned to his guards, his voice carrying across the clearing with absolute authority. "Burned cabin. Leave no trace of our presence here. The council must believe the exile died in the attack. It's the only way to ensure her safety." "No," Sybil breathed, watching as soldiers moved toward her home with torches. "It's already decided." Brom still wouldn't look at her directly.
You will take what you can carry and leave within the hour. Head south, away from Pack territories. There are human settlements 3 days' walk from here. And Sybil's voice broke. About everything that happened here, the nights by the fire, the things were necessary for my son's recovery, nothing more. The lie was so obvious, so painful, that Sybil almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she watched as Silas broke away from the guard holding him and ran to her, his small arms wrapping around her waist. No, she can't leave. Papa, please, she's my friend. She saved me. Please don't make her go. Brahm's expression cracked, just for a moment. Sybil saw the agony beneath the ice, the way his hands clenched at his sides, as if physically restraining himself from reaching out. Silas, Brahm said, his voice gentler than it had been with Sybil. Say goodbye. I don't want to. Say goodbye, son. That's an order. Silas looked up at Sybil with tear-filled amber eyes. Will I ever see you again? Sybil knelt, cupping his face in her hands. She wanted to lie, to give him comfort, but she'd been lied to enough today. I don't know, little wolf, but I will never forget you. She kissed his forehead, then stood, forcing herself not to look at Brahm as guards pulled the sobbing child away. Within an hour, the cabin was ablaze. Orange flames licked at the stone walls, consuming the bed where she'd healed Silas, the hearth where she'd shared tea with Brahm, every piece of the fragile sanctuary she'd tried to build. Sybil stood at the edge of the clearing, her small pack of belongings at her feet, watching her world burn. Brahm mounted his horse, Silas secured behind him, still crying. The king sat tall in the saddle, black furs draped over his shoulders, every inch of the untouchable ruler. He looked at her one last time, and Sybil saw it, the briefest flash of pain so raw it stole her breath. Then he turned his horse and rode away without looking back, taking the last piece of her shattered heart with him.
They say you find yourself in the ruins. I found something else in those ashes, a secret that turned exile into destiny and betrayal into the most complicated gift I'd ever received. The snow began to fall as the sun set, soft flakes that hissed when they touched the still warm ashes of Sybil's cabin. She sat in the cold, her cloak pulled tight, staring at the blackened ruins. She should move, should start walking south before full darkness fell, should put as much distance as possible between herself and the north that had broken her twice. But her legs wouldn't obey. She'd survived political exile, a bleeding shifter pup, an alpha king's arrival, assassination attempts, and a battle that should have killed her. Somehow, this quiet ending hurt worse than all of it. Mercy as survival, Sybil whispered bitterly to the falling snow. What a gift. But something nagged at her, something about the way Brahm had looked at her in that final moment, the way his hands had clenched, the crack in his voice when he'd called Silas back. A man who felt nothing wouldn't have struggled so hard to maintain the mask. What was he hiding? Sybil stood on numb legs and moved toward the ruins. The heat from the ashes had melted the snow in a perfect circle, creating a ring of black against white. She didn't know what she was looking for. Closure, maybe, or proof that it had all been real. Her foot caught on something metal, half buried in ash. Sybil knelt, brushing away the debris with shaking fingers. Her breath stopped. It was a ring. Heavy, gold, carved with the symbol of the Iron Claw Pack, a wolf's head surrounded by thorns. The signet ring that every Alpha King wore, the ring that commanded the loyalty of every wolf in the north. Brahm's ring. No, Sybil whispered, turning it over in her hands. You didn't lose this. You're too careful. She stopped.
Something was inside the band, a tiny roll of parchment sealed with wax. With trembling fingers, Sybil broke the seal and unrolled it. The handwriting was sharp, efficient, written in haste. You asked what I wanted from you. I wanted you safe. The council would kill you if they knew what you mean to me. This ring commands armies. The parchment inside commands truth. You are not a commoner, Sybil of no name. You are the rightful heir to the high seat of Thornhold, stolen as a child during the Red Coup. Your mother wasn't a chieftain's daughter. She was the queen. I've known since the second night, when you spoke of your mother's herbs. Only royal healers know the bloodbane remedy. Only Thornhold queens wear braids with 12 strands. I didn't leave you to die. I left you the key to your own power. For us to truly be equals, you cannot be my subject. You must be my match. Reclaim what was stolen. Then, if you choose, come find me. B. Sybil read it twice. 3 times, her hands shaking so badly the parchment rattled. Thornhold, the high seat, her mother a queen? Memories flooded back with new context, her mother's strange knowledge of politics, the way her father had always seemed like he was playing a role, never quite comfortable in his own skin, the uncle who'd visited once when she was 5, calling her mother Your Grace before being hurriedly ushered away. The coup that orphaned so many children 20 years ago, the lost princess presumed dead. I'm not an exile, Sybil whispered to the ashes. I'm a queen in hiding. Brom hadn't rejected her. He'd set her free. He'd given her the ring that controlled his armies, a sign of absolute trust. And he'd revealed the truth that would let her stand beside him as an equal, not a pet. You brilliant, impossible man, Sybil breathed, clutching the ring to her chest. The question now wasn't whether she could survive, it was what kind of queen she wanted to become. Sybil stood in the snow, the signet ring on her thumb, too large for her finger, but perfect as a promise. Around her, the north seemed to hold its breath. She'd come to these woods to disappear, to become nothing, to fade into silence. Instead, she'd found a dying child who needed mercy, an alpha king who needed to see beyond power, and a destiny she'd been running from her entire life. Some chains are worse than death, she'd told Brom weeks ago, but some crowns, she realized now, were meant to be reclaimed. Sybil turned south, toward the territories where whispers of Thornhold rebellion had been growing, toward the people who'd been waiting 20 years for their lost queen to return. She walked away from the ashes with nothing but a ring, a revelation, and the bone-deep certainty that this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of war. They say some love stories end at the altar. Ours began in ashes and blood and took 3 years, 2 kingdoms, and 1 impossible war to write. 3 years later, the bards sang a new song in the taverns of the north. It spoke of the White Queen who rose from exile, who returned to Thornhold with nothing but a Wolf King's signet ring and the kind of quiet fury that topples empires. The song told of how she rallied the scattered resistance, how she revealed her birthright not with grand proclamations, but with her mother's blood-bane remedy, saving an entire village from poison, how she fought beside her people rather than above them, how she reclaimed her throne, not through conquest, but through the same thing that had saved a dying wolf pup 3 years earlier, mercy backed by steel. The song also spoke of the Iron King who waited, who sent no armies to claim her, no demands for the return of his ring, no threats or ultimatums, just a single white wolf that appeared at the edge of Thornhold's territory every full moon, watching, waiting, protecting. The people called it the ghost. Sybil called it hope. The day Sybil rode to the Iron Claw border, she wore white furs and a crown of silver thorns. Her red hair was braided in the royal style, 12 strands, just as her mother had worn. Bram met her at the territorial line, alone, except for Silas, who was 9 now and already showing the signs of becoming a powerful alpha in his own right. They stood on opposite sides of an ancient stone marker, two rulers with kingdoms behind them and an impossible history between them. "You came," Bram said, simply. "You waited," Sybil replied. "I promised you equality. Queens don't come when summoned, and kings don't kneel." Sybil's voice was steady, no longer the uncertain exile who'd pulled silver from a dying pup 3 years earlier. Mercy backed by steel. Silas couldn't contain himself any longer. He shifted into his wolf form and bounded across the border, tackling Sybil with enough enthusiasm to make her laugh, the first real laugh she'd allowed herself in months. "Silas," Bram called, but there was no heat in it. "Let him," Sybil said, hugging the wolf child who'd started it all. "Some bonds don't respect borders." Bram crossed the marker then, closing the distance between them. He still moved like a predator, but there was something different in his eyes now. Not possession, not command. Recognition. "The Council has agreed to a formal alliance between Thornhold and Ironclaw. Trade agreements, mutual defense, a peace that will hold." "I know. I signed the documents yesterday. There's one more clause they requested." I read it. "The marriage clause. The joining of two kingdoms through the bond of choice, not political necessity." "And?" Bram asked, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. Sybil reached into her cloak and pulled out his signet ring, the one she'd worn on a chain around her neck for 3 years. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, holding it out. Bram took it slowly. Then, deliberately, he slipped it onto her finger instead of his own. "Keep it," he said quietly. "A queen should have the means to command armies, don't you think? Even your armies? Especially mine." The bards would later sing of the White Queen and the Iron King who ruled side by side, with a bond forged in mercy and tempered in fire. They would sing of how she'd moved into an old cabin to escape her past and found a bleeding pup under her bed who changed her future. They would sing of the lesson learned in ash and blood, that mercy is not weakness, it's the seed of true power, that love delayed is not love denied, that some destinies cannot be escaped, only embraced, and that the strongest bonds are not those demanded by blood or law, but those chosen freely, in the space between survival and hope. Years later, when Silas was grown and ruling his own territory, he would tell his own children the story. "Your grandmother," he would say, "saved my life when she had every reason to run, and in doing so, she saved all of us." "Was she afraid?" the children would ask. "Terrified," Silas would reply, "but she reached out her hand anyway." That's what makes a true queen, not the crown, but the courage to show mercy when the world demands cruelty. And in the stone hall of the Iron Claw Pack, next to the White Tower of Thornhold, 2 thrones sat side by side, equal in height, equal in power, bound by choice. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic tales. Comment Queen Wolf if you believe in love that's earned, not given. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show mercy to something broken. You never know what kind of destiny you might be saving. The end.